Welcome to today's Explainer, Models Overview, covering Opus 4.7, Sonnet 4.6, Haiku 4.5, and Anthropic's deprecation policy straight from Claude Master. Look, let's jump right into a really critical reality for any developer working with the Claude API. Picking an AI model, it isn't just about unlocking some cool new features. It's actually about actively preventing your application from suffering catastrophic downtime.
Imagine this scenario for a second. You pick a model ID, you ship your app to production, and 6 months later, it just breaks silently. Not because your code changed, but because Anthropic retired the model and you treated a temporary snapshot like a permanent fixture. And when this happens, there's no polite warning in the response, just a hard API failure. This is exactly what goes wrong when model lifecycles are ignored.
So, to avoid wasting resources before a deprecation even happens, consider this frankly staggering data point. Claude Haiku 4.5 delivers comparable coding performance to the previous generation's Sonnet 4, but, get this, at 1/3 the cost and more than twice the speed. Defaulting to the most expensive option is a massive trap. Model selection is without a doubt the single biggest lever you have on your API costs.
Which brings us to the three-tiered Claude model family. On one end, you've got Haiku 4.5 for high-volume tasks where your latency absolutely needs to stay under 200 milliseconds. On the far end, there's Opus 4.7. Think of that as your deliberate, complex reasoning engine for multi-step tasks across hundreds of files. And right in the sweet spot, Sonnet 4.6. That's your balanced production workhorse, packing an incredible 1 million token context window.
Okay, let's look at Section 1, the one example, building a web searching research assistant. It's one thing to talk about tiers, but let's actually see this applied to real-world architecture.
Let's say you're building out this research assistant. The user asks a question, the AI searches the web, and it synthesizes an answer. Well, this requires multi-turn logic involving tool use and coherent summarization. The model outputs a tool use block, your code runs the search, passes the result back, and the model structures the final answer. This moderate complexity, it's exactly where Sonnet 4.6 just totally shines.
Passing maximum tokens to Sonnet 4.6 here is highly efficient because it was specifically improved for agentic search. It literally consumes fewer tokens per tool use turn than earlier models. If you tried this with Haiku, it'd probably struggle with integrating the context of those multi-turn search results. And Opus? Sure, Opus would handle it fine, but you'd just be paying way more for practically the same answer. Sonnet isn't a compromise here, it's absolutely the correct choice. Which naturally leads us to Section 2, Managing Model Lifecycles. Because honestly, no matter which tier you deploy, you're bound by a strict lifecycle that you just cannot afford to ignore in production.
Every single model flows through these 4 stages: active, legacy, deprecated, and finally retired. Now, Anthropic commits to giving developers at least 60 days of notice before hitting that retired status. And remember that nightmare scenario we talked about earlier? When it hits retired, it triggers a hardcode error, not a gracefully degraded answer. The notice is real, and ignoring it has a very real cost.
So the really crucial thing to grasp is how modern model strings actually work. Starting with the 4.6 generation, Anthropic uses dateless IDs, like Claude-Sonnet-4-6. These are pinned snapshots. They are not evergreen pointers that are magically going to upgrade behind the scenes. When Anthropic releases a new snapshot, you have to actively update that ID in your code yourself.
If you want to keep your application running smoothly, you need to make this your operational mandate. Check Anthropic's model deprecations page when you ship, not when something breaks. Checking that page needs to be a standard part of your deployment checklist, not some frantic troubleshooting step you're taking at 2 in the morning when your API calls are suddenly failing.
Let's make this super practical right now. The scheduled retirement date for older date-stamped models, specifically Claude Sonnet 4 2025-014, and the Opus equivalent is June 15, 2026. If you have those old date-stamped IDs sitting in your codebase today, you need to update them to Claude Sonnet 4.6 and Claude Opus 4.7. But wait, don't just swap the string. You have to run your test suite against these new IDs long before the deadline, because there will be behavioral differences between generations.
Bringing it all together, the key takeaways from this explainer are simple, but they're critical. Respect the deliberate trade-off structure. Haiku for speed, Sonnet for everyday production, Opus for depth. Understand that every model has a hard retirement date and that dateless IDs are pinned snapshots. Match the model to the task and proactively test new IDs before the clock runs out.
So, are you ready to optimize your architecture and truly master the Claude API? Head over to claudemaster.net to read the full chapter,
dive into 3 fully worked examples and secure your application's future today. But before you go, I want you to ask yourself, if Anthropic retired your current model tomorrow, would your application survive gracefully, or would it break entirely?